Greetings, Sand family and community. My name is Katie Gray, and I'm here leading us forward with John Prendergast as part of our Wisdom in Times of Crisis online summit event. John is a remarkable human being. He is author of numerous books, The Deep Heart being one of them. He's a spiritual leader, and he's a retired adjunct professor. He has a private practice in psychotherapy, and he leads remarkable meditations. And it is my honor, my greatest honor, to welcome him today. I think he's going to lead us on an incredible journey today. Thank you so much for being with us and for creating this time in your schedule to come and bring us some wisdom in times of crisis.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate being welcomed. So we have a few minutes to be together, and I was interested in exploring facing our fear and also discovering our deepest ground, and also how the deep heart and the ground relate to one another. I recently published a book called The Deep Heart, and it's integrally related to the theme of the ground and a sense of stability. And during the time of this pandemic, of course, it's very triggering for people on different levels. So I thought it would be helpful. Some small piece of wisdom I could share might be with viewers and listeners to deal with fear and also to deepen in their intimacy with their ground and the depths of their heart. And so I'd like to begin with a little meditation, and then we'll have a conversation and see where it goes. So I invite everyone to sit comfortably and close your eyes or lower your eyes. I'll strike my meditation bell. And take a few deep breaths. And I invite you to let your attention drop down. Let the forehead relax, let the eyes relax. And let your attention settle down and into the interior of your body. And feel the weight of your body held by the gravity of the earth. Let yourself relax. We often carry tension we're not aware of until we do relax. And often we carry a tension in the core of our body. And that is unnecessary. So feel yourself held, the weight of your body held. And a sense of space all around your body. And relax into this sense of being held. Actually held in a greater space. A spacious awareness that is open, wakeful, and loving. And as we begin to feel ourselves held, we may have a sense of resting back. or falling back. And it's very interesting to begin to sense into this spacious awareness and notice if there's really any border or boundary. We may begin to feel that this spacious, loving awareness actually permeates our body. And that our body is made up of this spacious awareness. So for the moment, feel yourself not only held, but that which is holding. Holding you and everyone and everything else. So we'll come out in a little while. But if you're listening to this recording at a later time, you could stop it here and just continue to deepen into the sense of being deeply held.
Thank you. John, that was absolutely wonderful. Really appreciate you're not just speaking about it, you're bringing us there. So thank you for bringing us.
Well, you know, it's very important not just to speak about this, you know, but to actually not only speak from it, but to live from it. And this is available to each of us. Access to this, we could call it a field, but it's infinitely open and spacious and wakeful and loving. And it is our greatest resource, actually, during a crisis, because it's the source. It's actually where everything comes from and returns to. So the quieter we are in terms of our listening, it's not really about efforting, it's really about attuning, learning to let attention drop down and open up, and discover what's always here. Um, and I found in my work, I'll just make a few preliminary comments and then we can have the conversation. You know, I've been working with people for over 40 years, and I was a professor, adjunct professor of psychology for 23, and I trained therapists, and I've had a long meditation practice and self-inquiry practice, and worked very intimately with people and individually in groups. And it's just been fascinating to really discover what a human being is and capable of, and what the body is, and how sensitive we are. And as we really begin to listen, as attention drops in and falls back, we can discover dimensions of the heart that we never knew were even possible. Not only psychological dimensions and soulful dimensions, but a universal dimension of the heart that we share with all beings, and from which compassion and kindness and awe and generosity spring. And similarly, it's a kind of portal, an opening to the infinite. The mind is an opening to the infinite. The heart is a portal or opening to the infinite. And so too, the ground or the hara is. And these are fascinating as we begin to become more intimate with our experience and really go into the depths of them, even difficult experiences, including fear or shame, for instance. If we go right into the heart of an experience, it opens up. And in this way, we discover dimensions of the heart and of the ground that are quite profound and uh, open up to actually our true nature. We open up into a vast openness of our ground or a vast openness of the heart. And really, the two are not different. They're just different entry points to this awareness. So this is something I love to invite people to explore for themselves, not to listen to a talk about it, but to really deeply inquire in their own experience of felt sensing, being intimate with their direct experience, and discover actually an inherent openness that's here.
Wow, beautiful. When you speak of the ground, you speak of the earth, grounding, correct?
That's one dimension of it. Like that's the physical dimension, and actually an archetypal dimension too. We have many, myths of an underground journey, and medicine work often has an underground journey aspect where the hero or the heroine goes into a kind of altered state and overcomes obstacles and gains insights and um, encounters allies and comes out with greater wisdom and openness that's shared with the community. So that would be a dimension of the ground that's not so much physical, although we have images of entering into trees and going underground and subterranean realms. This is kind of a transpersonal dimension of the ground. So we have a physical dimension where we feel solid in our body. We feel here, we connected with the earth. There's an archetypal level where we're really in touch with these deep aspects of the psyche or the soul. And there's a deeper dimension to the ground too, and which is the ground of our true nature or the ground of being. And this can feel like a falling away of everything, a kind of groundless ground, and yet it brings paradoxically a sense of tremendous stability. It's almost like a keel of a sailboat. We feel rooted actually in truth, in reality. So this is an interesting fact or facet, I would say, of the word ground. It has a kind of sensate aspect, a felt sense, but also a metaphoric sense as well. We feel grounded. The more in touch with reality we are, actually, the more grounded we feel.
Beautiful. In your meditation, I'm tying this in your meditation, you said you may feel as though you're falling backward.
Mm-hmm.
As if I would relate that to as if your ground is becoming fluid and you're not, you're that space probably where we're transitioning into the ethereal ground of moving beyond, would you say the attachment to needing to be solidified here in the physical, of allowing ourselves to stretch beyond this?
Exactly. Yeah, we're no longer so identified as being concretely in this body. But the interesting thing is, and it's not like we're leaving the body. We're not having an out of body experience. We're actually having an in the body experience. We're going more deeply into the core of the body. And what's fascinating is that core is wide open. So it's full of aliveness, it's full of energy, and it's actually full of what everything is made of, which is our true nature. So the falling back is like the opening back of the heart area and falling back into true nature, or the ground can feel like initially a descent, but it also is an opening. And it's it's difficult to describe because we feel ourselves more here, like really present, but that here is very open. It's not here trapped inside of our personality or trapped inside of the body. We actually feel a tremendous aliveness and freedom as that opens, and it's beautiful to experience it and to share with this, because it is shared. It's like you're touching it a little bit right now, I can tell. as we talk about it. And there's an aliveness to it. There's a sense of connection. So we're tapping into kind of a shared life force, a primal current of life also, which is beautiful and healing.
Healing. To me, this is the essence of true connection. When I think of so many times, I'm tying in fear being something that, because of our fear, we have encased ourselves in that comfort of the ego, and we've locked ourselves into this physical realm because this is where we imagine that we're safest, are here. So we're in survival mode, yet we're not really present because we're in survival mode. So we're scrambling. And what you're saying is, what I'm gathering is, it's a letting go. I think I'm also seeing a letting go of the story of the ego, and then allowing yourself to fall back. Wouldn't you say that that would take immense trust?
Trust is a very key theme in this, Katie, because we learn the kind of inherent trustworthiness of life. And that doesn't mean that difficult challenges won't come or hard things won't happen, but it's actually more primal than that. It's like a trust in life no matter what. And that trust brings such a feeling of openness and actually a capacity for adaptation. So when we're untrusting, what happens is we feel contracted, and very often energy kind of shifts up to the head and to the eyes and to the forehead. And so we're vigilant, hyper vigilant, we're scanning. It's like, where's the danger all the time? And so we're actually much less safe. And so even on a practical level, as we actually deepen into the interior of who we really are, and really begin to settle as we work through our fears and work through our conditioning and feel ourselves really more present, we're much more available, and we're much more adaptive. And God knows we need to do this not only individually, but collectively, because this crisis that we're in with the coronavirus, I think, is just one symptom of a much larger crisis. In terms of climate disruption, for instance, all these different systems are, really going on high alert, and many of them are failing. Many natural systems are weakening and collapsing and failing, and this epidemic may be, one of the symptoms of that. So we have quite a challenge ahead of us as humanity to individually and collectively meet this crisis from a much more grounded and open and clear and loving space than we ever have been before. So each of us have a responsibility to do this individually and collectively. And those two realms interact, because we're interdependent. We all need each other's help. And the deeper, more rooted we are in our own autonomy and our own strength and our own wisdom and our own love, the more we have to give and to be of service, not only to one another, but really to the planet itself. So yeah, it's very interesting, the theme of safety, and I'm glad you mentioned it, because there's a beautiful inquiry, and one of the things I love to do is invite people into a meditative form of inquiry, which is not an intellectual or analytic form. It's really meditative inquiry is a form of, it's kind of an art of sitting with an essential question, something you really want to know about, and but not just think about with your ordinary mind. And so safety is a very interesting subject to explore with meditative inquiry. So for instance, if we bring attention to the heart area, take a few deep breaths and imagine, that we can breathe directly in and out of here. So our attention settles down into the heart area. And we ask a question like, what is true safety? Or what is the deepest safety? And then we let it go, because it's not a question for the mind. It's really a question for our deepest knowing. Like, what is the deepest safety? What is true safety? And we're quiet and receptive. Very often, like within, 10, 15, 20 seconds, something begins to bubble up, a kind of inner knowing. It may come as a phrase, it may come as a subtle sensation or feeling, what we call a felt sense, but some interior wisdom begins to, it may come as a lightness of being, an openness. And what we're doing is we're actually entering into a deeper dimension, the deepest dimension of our being, entering into a dialogue with it. And very often, like with safety, if we sit with that question, a whole different dimension of the meaning of safety begins to emerge. So it's very interesting in a time like this to question our common sense assumptions, certainly to be practical, and take ordinary measures for self-care, but also to begin to explore these existential issues more deeply, and also how we're triggered to work with our fear. So that was something I wanted to talk a little bit about too. But I don't want to say too much.
You're doing so beautifully. I don't even need to prompt you. You're just, oh, the well is just.
I'm overflowing here.
It's so beautiful. This is
all right. Well, feel free to jump in if anything's not clear.
Beautiful. And this reflection, I want you to keep going. I was just going to tie this in that when I think about us collectively, I love everything you're sharing, and I love the vision of us. I'm seeing us letting go of this encapsulated false sense of safety that we're getting from our response to fear, our ego that's keeping us locked into this physical because this is where we feel safe because we're in survival mode. You're saying lean back into the spaciousness. And I said, does it require trust? And you said, yeah, you have, absolutely, there's safety involved. But what I'm seeing reveal itself is that, you think of the expansive collective response to trauma that each of us individually have been through our whole lives. We're in a collective state on a day-to-day basis where I would say majority of humans are in survival mode. We're in the response to fear. And when I think about, what if someone hasn't experienced the introduction to feeling safe because they felt so unsafe, comfortable in survival mode. And it occurs to me that every time you do this work, you take action as you're guiding us, just even as an example where you led us in the beginning, you're actually building a stronger sense of safety every time you do that. You're actually being introduced to if safety was an archetype, you're welcoming the divine presence of safety, and you're learning from the source because you're letting go and you're trusting that you can lean into the spacious field where there's not the physical. It may be uncomfortable at first, but you don't even have to, be a very trusting person to begin, because you will gain trust as
That's right. It's actually something that we learn, and it's like the body-mind repatterns. We're organized around being a separate self and tightly kind of coiled in the core. And as we begin to question who we really are, our stories and all the feelings and sensations that goes with it, there's a kind of unwinding process that happens. And it can be a little bit unsettling because, gosh, I thought I knew who I was. I was this, and I'm discovering I'm this, And so the transition from that to that, it's an unfolding, and it takes time, and it's a repatterning, actually a profound repatterning to embody this understanding. And so it's as if, I think of it sometimes as if the body mind is being bathed in light, in the light of awareness, and it just starts to be saturated with it, and if the body has been saturated in a lot of fearful conditioning, a lot of trauma, it's going to take time to gradually unwind, right? And also, if it were relational in origin, the trauma, you'll need support relationally, either from a friend or a partner or a coach or a therapist, but someone who can really be there and attune with you as well. So in any case, it's different from person to person, but as we tap into this source, we do learn to trust. We learn that letting go is actually safe. We learn that we can relax. We learn that not just on a physical level, but really on a profound psychological and spiritual level. And the body mind begins to repattern, it begins to open, and we release the old learnings, the misprogramming, the misunderstanding. And it's as if we're infused, right, more and more deeply with this sense of trust, no matter what, no matter what, right? And that's very beautiful, to not just have that as a philosophy, but to actually feel it deeply within ourselves. So you're right. It's very much a kind of a learned process, or even more precisely, an unlearning. We're unlearning what we thought made us safe, which was be separate and contracted and keep ourselves either be aggressive or keep ourselves hidden. And we realize it's actually safe to shine. That which is essential in us actually can begin to radiate out, for the benefit of all beings, and of course for ourselves as well.
Um, when I think of us bathing ourselves, John, this is all applicable. Like, can we imagine how useful this would be if, say, the entire world was dealing with a pandemic and, there was fear worldwide? Like, it's so profound what we're dealing with right now that it seems like it's out of a sci-fi movie. This, take it to the as far as you possibly could, and that's
Right,
how important this work
right,
is.
right.
But when I think of us bathing ourselves, I love that image of you saying bathing in the light of presence. And if we've been bathing in fear and pain and this false narrative for so long, it may take time. Well, then, where my mind goes is, how do we then? What would there be a step that you would explain as far as the detox? Because if we've been bathing, and I think of this, we're this sponge collecting. Since we're born, we're collecting information and understanding and mapping out what life is, and then
That's true.
you're going to
Hmm.
clear the map, and you're going to actually let the divine bring you the new
Hmm.
reset. But how do we? Do you know what I mean? How do we wring out some of what?
Well, the wringing out, what I find is there's a natural process of release. And this is one of the beauties, is when we're attuning with something real, there's a sense of something becoming illumined within us, something beginning to come alive and release and relax. And that's the detox process. I mean, this is the detox, right? It's really the release of these patterns of tension. And of course, there's a cognitive dimension, which is our core negative beliefs. So the detoxing of that is really the release of those old narratives to see that they're either incorrect or no longer relevant. And this is one of the beauties I find working with people, is like, I was talking about meditative inquiry. If you sit with a story, a negative story about yourself, it's like, I'm unsafe, right? And then you just ask yourself, what's my deepest knowing, or what's the truth? Something will come that will dispel that, and with that, a sense of release. And then even the thought I'm unsafe or safe begins to fall away, because it's on a mental level. On an emotional level, what happens with feelings is if we've suppressed them, sometimes they will become temporarily a little more turbulent as we're in touch with them. We're just more in touch with our feeling. And what happens though is they begin to harmonize, they begin to mature, and the core essential feelings actually begin to take precedence over the ones that were more reactive and based on a separate narrative of being unworthy or lacking or flawed in some kind of way. And somatically, and this is what I've been talking about, kind of somatically, energetically, the body just was like, oh my God, what a relief to be in touch with something that is kind and true, which is to say who we really are by nature. So it's really a dispelling of illusion. It's like, where does the dark go when we turn on the light, right? It's really confusion, innocent confusion, in fact, at the core. A lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion. And as the light of awareness comes in, there's a dispelling process, and sometimes physical release. I mean, sometimes there'll be a little bit of shaking or a little bit of crying if it's some trauma that we're dealing with. But again, that's the body just kind of releasing, a natural release process, which kind of leads us into the question of working with fear a little bit that I was touching on. And I just wanted to share with viewers and listeners because it's practical and it's helpful. So if you do find yourself fearful during this time, or really any time, generally what we do is we try to suppress it, distract ourselves, medicate ourselves, keep ourselves busy, use drugs, alcohol, shopping, sex, whatever it may be, work too hard. We turn away from it. But what I think not just me, but many people have realized is we need to turn towards it and actually begin to experience it in our body, that which we've been trying to avoid. And of course, depending on how much fear there is, we may go more slowly and need more support. But the gradual movement is actually one towards greater self-intimacy, meaning a willingness and capacity to feel and sense and inquire into what our actual experience is. So I'd like to start with the body and just ask people, where are you feeling that or sensing that in your body? And this is something we can do collectively right now as a kind of group exercise. If we're aware of any kind of tension, any discomfort in the body, we just kind of notice, does it tend to localize somewhere? And if so, is there a center to that? And then the invitation is to begin to breathe into it. Importantly, not to change it. This is actually a very important point. We're not trying to get rid of it. We're actually wanting to be more intimate and understand it. So the point here is really understanding. And if there is a release, it will come of its own quite naturally. So we breathe into it, we feel into it, just to take a minute or two. Like in my case, for many years, I held tension in the solar plexus. And as many people do, but we hold it in the chest and the lower belly and our throats. And these are common areas of holding, in our jaw, for instance, or shoulders elsewhere. So to breathe into it and just sense it. And often just by sensing and feeling, paying attention in this way, there'll be a natural slight or more than slight relaxation. But it can be interesting to just inquire as we breathe into wherever the sensation of what we call fear localizes. And it can be useful to name it, but once we name it, to let go of the name, just experience it as pure sensation. Like the question is, what's in the very center of this? And again, not to go to the mind for an answer, be very innocent in our inquiry, as if we're exploring for the first time. What's in the very center or core of this? And then we let the question go and we just breathe and sense and feel. And it's quite interesting what begins to unfold. Quite surprising very often. In this way, that which we've been avoiding, our fear, this contraction, becomes an entryway or a portal to something that's quite different from the fear itself. Very often when people begin to kind of lean into, breathe into, inquire into, this which they've been turning away from, it opens up, and fear begins to, of its own, because it's being met with understanding and kindness, begins to relax. And we start opening to a whole nother dimension of our being that is fearless. So here's the paradox to the mind, that our fear is often the most direct portal to our fearlessness. Our shame, which often we'll feel in the belly or in the heart somewhere. If we similarly breathe and feel and inquire into it, reveals our innocence. So these essential feelings will emerge, and the ground of being itself. So there's one other little kind of skillful method that I share with people in this inquiry, which is thoughts, feelings, and sensations are complex, and they each kind of interact and reinforce each other. And when we're dealing with fear, particularly fear that's been with us our whole life, it was generated in childhood. And very often There's a story that goes with it that is, we may be aware of, but often is subconscious. And it's holding it all in place. So if we can actually ask ourselves, is there a belief that goes with this sensation, this contraction? And then just be quiet. Often it will come like in 5 or 10 seconds, if not sooner. And be just a few words, a kind of a child's language, you know. And then we can, again, do a little inquiry. What's my deepest knowing now about that? What's my deepest knowing about this old story that I have about myself that induces this contraction, right? Like I'm all alone. No one's there for me. No one cares for me. The world is hostile. I'm not equipped to deal with it. These are kind of related stories we may have. And as we sit, really invite the light of awareness in this inquiry, this is when the light begins to enter into the conditioned body mind by intimately sensing and feeling and inquiring what's really true. You know, we're inviting the light of awareness of our true nature in. And we begin to feel very often a kind of softening, a melting. And fear is very frequently a freeze response, you know. And interestingly, it's a good way to preserve things, put them in the freezer. So there's all sorts of frozen essential qualities, you know, something very precious, something very beautiful that begins to thaw and open as we approach our experience with this kind of intimacy and innocence as well. It's an open-ended kind of inquiry. We can pace it ourselves. If it feels a little bit overwhelming, we kind of step back, you know, and open our eyes and ground ourselves in present experience, take a walk, whatever. You know, we don't have to be, you know, really hard-nosed about it. We can be gentle with ourselves. But it's a beautiful way, I found, to work with fear and to help guide others to do so. You know, and to realize sometimes it's very important to feel like someone else is there for you as you explore it, that you're not all alone, you know. So that may be an important element.
Because I mean, I keep getting these beautiful visions while you're talking. One thing I want to mention is when you say, I love, you know, let the question come and then let it go. Don't be attached, because then the mind will take over and we're trying to open ourselves up. I see us moving, you know, it's as if there's a movement in what you're speaking, because if we stay there for too long, we don't keep moving, and we're moving up into a really beautiful dimension. So it's let it go, keep moving. Like I love the movement that I feel in your work. There's just, I love how it feels as though it's not stagnant. It feels like there's definitely a pulse that's greater than you, that's pulling and helping work with you.
Well, this is it. It's tapping into a greater intelligence that has a kind of an intuitive sense to it. So it's creative, you know, and flexible.
It feels that way. And I love also the vision of, you know, when I think about right now what's going on, you speaking to feeling alone and feeling afraid. This is bringing up so much trauma for so many people, childhood memories of being abandoned, of not getting, of being heard, of being ignored, of being left alone. So there's a lot of you know, trauma response that's risen to the surface for people, and now they're being told to be by themselves, alone, quarantined. You know, you're exactly right. In the work that I do, it's, you know, holding space so that someone feels safe enough to look within at the shadow. But I also really appreciate what you're saying, is that, you know, if we tie back into what you were saying originally, that when you allow yourself to lean into this, you open yourself up to the connective field that is the field of connection. And, you know, our fear is keeping us frozen away from the connective field. But when we open ourselves up to the connective field, you no longer feel alone. And you feel a deep sense of being held by the oneness, by something so much bigger than you. And you feel instantly so much safer. So I think this is such important, beautiful work that you're offering Your techniques are profound because they do instantly bring us to a safe space.
Mm.
And I also really appreciate that you're not, you know, it's not like, okay, get the courage to look at this stuff. You're saying it's within that. It's within, that's the portal into finding the oneness, is allow yourself to not to distract yourself or drink it down or be in a space of survival, but to just trust yourself, basically.
That's it. Trust yourself. And yeah, it's not about kind of so much an act of will, but an act of love, right? An act. That's why I use kind of the language of intimacy, and I think you're reflecting very beautifully, Katie, the essence of what I was saying, that, our greatest suffering actually comes from our sense of aloneness, our sense of profound separation. There are different levels to that. There's psychological and existential, but nonetheless, during a period when we're having to shelter in place, and particularly if we're alone, it's very, very hard, and it will be triggering as well. So, but it can be used, right? All of this experience can be used to go more deeply, and rather than distracting ourselves, we turn toward and move into and through our experience. And this is, for me, what's beautiful, because many non-dual teachings, well, I think they're changing actually, but some emphasize the kind of stepping back from experience and witnessing experience and knowing yourself as space. And that's beautiful. It's actually a very important first step, and sometimes sufficient. But very often our long-standing and deep conditioning is not touched by that, and actually requires a much more intimate contact. And it's below the surface of conscious awareness. And this is where a lot of people who have been interested in non-dual teachings and have meditated for many years, or gone on to satsangs and things like that, they feel frustrated and confused because they're kind of stuck with their conditioning, and it hasn't really shifted. So I find this interface of working with conditioning from the unconditioned, right? Being able to tap into presence and welcome our conditioning into it is really a critical principle, as much as we can. That's why that relaxing, the dropping in, opening up. And then from there, it's like, okay, what is it that's wanting attention? What is it that's wanting to be met with understanding and kindness? And from that, we welcome it in and explore it in this kind of innocent way. And with that attitude of openness and really of love, a devotion to the truth, that separation between our conditioned and unconditioned, psychological and spiritual lives, the gap closes, and we feel more unified within ourselves and more connected. So we're more connected, more here within ourselves, and thus available, and connected with something much greater, including one another.
Absolutely. And what you're saying is so, it feels so true and honest. And when I think about my mind keeps relating it to what's happening in the world right now, and this onslaught of fear, and reminder to stay in your story and stay in your mind and stay in the response of fear. And this is what's happening, and these are the statistics, and people are being inundated and encouraged to go up the thinking mind. And
exactly.
And what you're saying is, what would be the best if you want to deal with this is to go into heart, and
yes.
because that, I think, I know where our time is closing in a little bit, but so we're nearing our end, but full circle to where you brought us in the beginning, looking at the bigger issues that we are facing as a species. And this virus right now is like you said, it's one small piece in what needs to be looked at. And we have a big road in front of us to environmentally what's going on. And just, your work is essentially saying it's time to open our eyes. And
our hearts and our haras. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think the only reason why people are not rising up to take action, to be more involved in activism and be a part of helping the environment, is because they're afraid and they're hurt and they're in survival mode. So they're just taking care of themselves. And can you imagine the millions and millions and millions of helpers this earth would have if we gave ourselves permission to be fearless within our fear and wake up.
And to not act from fear, and to not act from rage, but actually to act from clarity and from love, because otherwise we're reactivists rather than activists. We're not really creative in the response, and so there's not going to be an enduring solution. And it feels like we're really at a very critical point in humanity, the situation we've never encountered before, not just with the coronavirus, which is, obviously it's paralyzed the world economy, created tremendous suffering, and on a relative level, people living paycheck to paycheck, no money, can't pay the rent, not enough food. It's very alarming on this level, but this is small potatoes in terms of what's likely to come. And so it's going to require big shifts individually and within our internal systems and our collective systems to be able to adapt and make the sacrifices that we need to, and be willing to dialogue with diverse points of view, and which requires a lot of stability and openness and tolerance as well. So yeah, if we're going to be activists, let's just say the deeper, more intimate we are with ourselves, the more powerful, the more loving and more transformative we'll be.
I absolutely, I resonate with everything you're saying. And I think that, it is the transformation, being willing to allow ourselves to feel safe enough, to feel enough trust, to find that fearlessness within ourselves, fearless enough to leave the mind where we've been programmed and inundated to be in the thinking mind, and have the courage to come into the heart and feel. Mm-hmm. To me, that is the transformation.
Amen.
We have a couple minutes left. I just want to, I love the power of intention, and I feel all of us together right now joining you on this beautiful, I don't even know, we're on this beautiful, it feels fluid, and we're in the ocean, and we're in this of consciousness. And with us all together here right now, I'd love to ask if you wanted to plant an intention in our hearts that we could all just hold together, having spoken about all that we've spoken about.
Here's what I would say. Rather than planting an intention, I'll ask a question. And then that will draw out what's most true, right? Because it'll be a little different for everyone. And the question is a living question. So again, we just have 2 minutes, I imagine. So close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, bring your attention to your heart area. You may want to put your hand over the mid-chest. Feel your breath as if it can enter and exit from your heart area. And then ask yourself, what's the most important thing? And don't go to your mind for an answer. What is the most important thing? And then receive, really open to what comes to you. Let it in. And then live in accordance with this. It'll be different for everyone. What is the most important thing? Okay.
Oh, John, I'm giving you a big hug.
Virtual hug.
Thank you so much. This was so beautiful, so powerful. I just feel all of us right now so moved and brought together.
Well, it was a delight to be with you, Katie, and with the other viewers as well.
Yay. Thank you so much, family, Sand family and community, for joining us. And yeah, here's to the heart.
Here's to the heart.